Welcome back to Darnley Cyber Café. Today, I want to talk about privacy, and I want to do it in a way that's a little different than the usual conversations around security and technology. Now, I'm not talking about passwords or settings or even encryption. I'm talking about something that's not normally discussed, something I found myself thinking more often the longer I thought about it. For most of my life, I believed privacy ended when I chose to speak. When I said something out loud, typed it into a message, or decided to share it publicly. What I didn't spend much time thinking about was everything that happens before that moment. The pauses, the hesitations, the things I almost say and decided not to. I've come to realize that those moments matter more than we think. Every day, I move through those systems that don't need my words to understand me. They learn from how long I pause, what I scroll past, what I return to, and what I quietly avoid. Over time, those signals start to form a picture that feels uncomfortably close to thought. So this episode isn't about science fiction, and it is not about exaggeration. It's about what research has already shown us, and what it means when prediction becomes more accurate than expression. So today, I want to change pace and take a careful look at what happens when private thought leaves digital trace, and why that matters for our future. Today, we still tend to believe that privacy ends when we speak, and that silence is safe. But inside digital systems, silence is not empty. It's just another signal. The way your cursor pauses before clicking, the speed at which you scroll, the content you hover over but don't engage with, the app you open, then close without doing anything at all. None of this feels like communication, and none of it feels public, but it all leaves a trace. The systems we use today aren't listening to thoughts, they're observing our behavior. And behavior, when collected over a string of time, becomes surprisingly revealing. Once these patterns emerge, understanding no longer requires access to words. It only requires consistency. Now, this is where it's crucially important to stay grounded when we're thinking about this, because what I'm describing here isn't speculative. It is not hypothetical. It has been studied and documented for years. Researchers have shown that personality traits, emotional states, political leanings, and personal preferences can be inferred with striking accuracy using digital behavior alone, such as likes, clicks, browsing patterns, timing, and engagement. And in some cases, these models were able to predict traits more accurately than close friends or family members. So this means no private messages were read, no inner thoughts were accessed, and no personal conversations were exposed. What mattered was correlation, repetition, and pattern recognition. And once a system becomes good at prediction, it no longer needs to understand why you think a certain way. It only needs to know what you're likely to do next. I will also add here, given my previous experience in this field of psychoanalysis, when I worked for certain agencies, have given me a unique curse in the unconscious as it defined cognition and behavior, and I'm trying to apply this here. There's a reason why your search bar feels private than most places online. People type things into the search engine, things that they would never say out loud. Questions shaped by uncertainty, fear, curiosity, and vulnerability. Maybe they look up an ailment, or questions they might not even be ready to admit themselves. Now, research has shown that search behavior can reveal anxiety, depression, health concerns, emotional stress, and ideological shifts, often before a person consciously understands those feelings themselves. Even unfinished searches matter. A sentence half typed, then erased, a question reworded several times before being submitted. These moments to us feel private, but understand they do pass through various systems designed to learn from them. Now, for a long time, we told ourselves this was just harmless, that it was anonymous, that it was just simple data. But data doesn't stay small anymore. It accumulates, it connects, and over time, it becomes very predictive. Now, understand, prediction changes power in ways that are easy to overlook. Research in behavioral science and human-computer interaction has shown that once systems can reliably anticipate behavior, they don't need to wait for decisions to be made. They act on probability instead. Now, this is not theoretical. It's already built into many of the systems we interact with every day. Content ranking algorithms decide what you see and what you don't, and it's not based on what you've said, but on what similar patterns suggest will hold your attention or influence your behavior. Credit and risk scoring models increasingly rely on behavioral signals rather than explicit actions. Even moderation and recommendation system are shaped by predictions about future behavior, not just past activity. What's important here is that none of this requires certainty. Prediction does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be good enough to guide outcomes. Once that threshold is crossed, choice doesn't disappear, it becomes nudged. Opportunities are surfaced or withheld. Certain paths are made easier to follow than others. And in some cases, decisions are effectively made before a person is even aware that that choice exists. So the system does not wait to see what you'll do, it acts on what it expects you to do, based on patterns that resemble your own. Now, this is where prediction stops being passive and starts shaping reality, not through force and not through surveillance in the traditional sense, but through a quiet adjustment of what feels available, visible, or likely. And over time, those adjustments do accumulate. The most significant consequence isn't surveillance, is adaptation. People begin to change how they behave, not because they're being actively watched, but because they sense they're being understood. They hesitate more, they self-edit, they avoid certain curiosities, they simplify themselves. Often this happens without conscious intent. Most effective surveillance system does not need to monitor you closely. It encourages you to adjust yourself. And when that adjustment becomes routine, the space for private thought begins to shrink, not because it's taken away, but because it no longer feels safe to explore freely. AI always brings a new aspect here, and eventually, AI models will begin to bridge that gap for us all, in both a positive and a negative way. As technology becomes better at predicting our behavior, privacy does not disappear overnight. It narrows, it moves upstream, closer to intention, closer to the moment before a decision is made. The concern now isn't that machines can read minds, it's that they don't need to do this at this time. When prediction becomes accurate enough, thought no longer has to be expressed to be acted upon. And when it happens, the space where private reflection used to live becomes smaller. I want to create this awareness. By understanding how these systems work gives us the ability to decide how much influence we allow them to have over our choices, our curiosity, and our inner lives. I would like to warn you all that this is all going into uncharted space, meaning that we are not always able to predict how this will turn out in the end. Now, for sake of example, human prediction is or will help aid law enforcement. But at the same time, and if I'm correct here, there has been already sci-fi movies made about computers predicting human mindsets, which ends up with a plot twist when the computers start making false claims and assumptions. If you haven't learned anything from my previous episodes of the unpredictability of AI, all of this is really a cherry on top. Thank you so much for spending this time with me at Darnley Cyber Café. I'm your host, Darnley. If you found this episode useful, consider sharing it with someone who might appreciate it, or follow the cafe to be notified when a new episode drops. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay aware, and remember, knowledge is your awareness.